Racist cop slaps the wrong black judge. What happens minutes later shocks everyone. It takes less than 3 minutes for an entire life to be misunderstood. But sometimes, it is within those 3 minutes that the world is forced to change. Subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Terrell, Texas. Just another ordinary Monday morning. The sky was still pale. The light had yet to stretch evenly across the rustic red brick rooftops. The clock on the wall at 1422 Elm Street read 6:17 a.m. when Clarissa Monroe shut the door behind her. No sirens, no bodyguards, no escort. She stepped into the new day alone, as she had for over 12 years, serving as a justice on the Texas Supreme Court. She didn't believe in pomp. She believed in what was right, in what was quiet, but powerful. She wore a simple ash-gray blazer, underneath which was the navy blouse she'd worn since her first hearing last year. The black judicial robe, a symbol of authority that others might flaunt. She neatly folded and placed in the back seat of her 2009 Toyota Camry, which had logged more than 180,000 miles. Clarissa never left her car empty. Beneath the driver's seat was a 174-page verdict she'd just finalized the night before, its cover sealed with the state court's insignia. Next to the steering wheel was a thermal cup that read, "Justice is not a luxury," a gift from a group of Howard law students the previous year. She stopped by her usual Monday morning coffee spot at the corner of Cypress Street. The barista, Malik, 24, a brown-skinned man whose mother had once been wrongfully jailed for 43 days due to misidentification, always served her without asking. "Hot latte, half-shot espresso," he smiled. Clarissa nodded, thanked him, unaware that this would be the last cup of coffee she drank before becoming the focus of national media. Leaving the cafe, Clarissa drove her usual route toward the courthouse. But just a few minutes later, a white and blue patrol car, plate number 07 Texas 7439, silently merged into her lane behind her. At first, she paid it no mind. This was Texas. Police cars were nothing unusual. But when she turned left onto Greenway Street, and the car was still tailing her, barely a car's length away, her instincts sharpened. Clarissa glanced at her rearview mirror. Reflected was the face of Officer Derek, white, a little over 30, with a high and tight buzz cut and eyes that hadn't blinked once through 3 turns. She knew that look. It wasn't the gaze of a man performing routine duty. It was the gaze of suspicion. A knot tightened in Clarissa's stomach, a reflex that never left, even after more than 2,700 trials and 29 years of service to justice. "Keep your hands at 10 and 2, she reminded herself, the mantra every black child in America has heard from their parents. As she approached the Shell gas station at the corner of Greenway and Cypress, she signaled and carefully pulled to the right curb. The patrol lights flashed red and blue, slicing through the morning stillness like a blade. The siren blared, sharp and jarring. Clarissa parked neatly at the curb and turned off the engine. She lowered her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel, fingers interlaced. Her lips were dry, but her expression remained composed. She wasn't afraid. But she understood. In this America, power and titles weren't always armor thick enough for a black woman. And at that very moment, in a silence so tense, it felt like the world was holding its breath, the fateful encounter between her and Officer Derek began. What had seemed like an ordinary morning was about to become the first chapter in a reckoning that would shake the entire nation. Officer Derek didn't approach like someone representing the law. He moved like a man looking for an excuse to unleash his anger. In a slightly wrinkled navy uniform with a sidearm holstered at his hip, he rapped hard on the car frame as though he were waking a dangerous criminal, not confronting a middle-aged woman who had just bought her morning coffee. "Where are you rushing off to? He barked through the crack in the window, offering no greeting, no introduction. Just a cold stare that skimmed over Clarissa's salt and pepper hair, as if she were just another statistic on some report. Clarissa looked up calmly. "Good morning, officer. May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" "Papers," he snapped. "Now, don't play games." The air instantly thickened like an early winter fog. Though her heart pounded, Clarissa kept her voice steady. "I'm reaching into my bag to get my wallet, all right? I'll explain every move I make." It wasn't courtesy. It was survival instinct. A reaction forged over decades of living in a system where a black person could be shot dead for moving too quickly. In 2016, Philando Castile had said the same words and still didn't survive. Clarissa remembered it vividly. She slowly opened her wallet, but the caution only seemed to aggravate Derek further. He leaned into the window. "You think you're smart, huh? Trying to be slick with me?" His breath reeked of old coffee and unresolved tension. In his eyes, Clarissa was nothing more than a black woman driving an old car, dressed plainly, and not knowing her place. Every detail that made her invisible to the system stood out to him. Then, without another word, Derek yanked open the car door with such force that the hinge groaned. Clarissa instinctively gripped the seat, but didn't resist. "I'll step out of the vehicle," she said, articulating each word clearly. And she did just that, unclipping her seatbelt, stepping out slowly, hands kept level at her sides. But before she could fully stand up, the slap landed. The sound cracked like a gunshot across the quiet gas station at 6:40 in the morning. The wind halted. A white woman carrying a breakfast bag dropped her coffee cup on the curb, the glass shattering with a sharp clatter. A 3-year-old sitting in the car across the lot burst into tears upon seeing the scene. Clarissa staggered, one hand bracing against the car, one foot nearly slipping off the edge of the curb. Her left cheek burned. Her throat tightened as the metallic taste of blood rose. But she didn't scream. She didn't curse. She simply stood still, eyes wide, lips pressed into a firm line. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, but cutting through the stifling silence, she said, "You just assaulted a justice of the Texas Supreme Court." Derek froze. For a moment, his eyes flickered, but then stiffened again, as though unable to believe what he'd just heard. "A justice of what?" he scoffed, laughing with disdain. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. At that gas station, around 13 people were pumping gas, grabbing snacks, or waiting for rides. In under 10 seconds, at least 7 phones were drawn. A 19-year-old named Ramon, working the night shift at a nearby meatpacking plant, pulled out his phone while muttering, "If this doesn't make the news, I swear I'm done believing in America." An Amazon delivery driver parked nearby captured the moment Clarissa stood tall, one hand gripping the edge of her car, with the outline of a handprint stark against her cheek, a wound that cut deeper than skin, tearing through the very fabric of the justice system right there on the street. And while Derek still hadn't realized what he'd touched, Clarissa knew exactly what she had done. It wasn't resistance. It wasn't retaliation. She had triggered an earthquake that would ripple across Texas and beyond, a wave of reckoning, a reminder that justice is not so easily struck down. Before Derek could speak again, Clarissa reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and pulled out a golden badge. The morning sun gleamed off the emblem of the Texas Supreme Court, and in that moment, what had just happened was no longer a routine traffic stop. "Judge, look at you." Derek let out a mocking laugh, his eyes scanning from her simple blouse down to the battered Toyota Camry, as if his entire worldview couldn't fathom that a black woman dressed plainly could hold power within the judicial system. But Clarissa didn't respond to the ridicule. She stood still, her gaze unwavering, the left side of her face still marked by the blatant imprint of abuse. Slowly, As if disarming a live grenade, she slipped her hand into the inner pocket of her blazer. A soft click echoed as she opened the small metal case, an item she only carried on the most significant court days. And then, resting in her open palm, the gold badge gleamed under the Texas sun, its embossed seal of the Texas Supreme Court standing crisp and undeniable like a declaration carved in truth. The sunlight caught the face of the badge, reflecting into the eyes of the growing crowd. No one spoke for the first few seconds. Then, like a ripple igniting a blaze, the murmurs erupted. Wait, is she a judge? Holy hell, he slapped a judge! I got the whole thing on video, live streaming now. A man in an oil-stained coverall, Tomas Rivera, a Mexican-American auto mechanic, pointed straight at Derek. You know what you just did? You just slapped the law itself. The crowd had grown to over 30 people. Among them was 17-year-old Jalen Morris, a student at Terrell South High School, live streaming to nearly 9,000 followers on Instagram. Within 10 minutes, the hashtag number Judge Monroe was trending across Texas, shared more than 47,000 times. A white woman named Susan Abbott, an elementary school teacher who had been pumping gas behind them, couldn't stay silent. She stepped forward, her hands trembling with anger. Ma'am, I'm sorry. I don't even know what to say. I've been teaching for 22 years, and I've never witnessed a more blatant act of disrespect. Clarissa still said nothing. She stood tall, badge in her left hand, her right arm hanging freely by her side, like a statement that required no speech. She wasn't a speaker, nor a campaigner, nor a victim seeking sympathy. She was a symbol, a woman struck not for wrongdoing, but because the system wasn't used to seeing strength wrapped in black skin. Derek began to feel sweat beads on his palms. He swallowed hard and turned toward a teenager recording nearby, barking, "Stop that! You can't film!" The boy only shrugged, refusing to stop. This is a public space. State law says I can record any criminal incident. Clarissa's composure struck louder than any yelling. The badge in her hand wasn't just a symbol. It was the only weapon in a war where the vulnerable wore no armor, only truth. Derek's eyes darted around, panic rising. His hand instinctively inched toward the firearm at his waist, a reflex of someone backed into a corner. But the eyes of dozens of witnesses made him freeze. Phones held aloft like arrows of justice, ready to capture any move that crossed the line. Clarissa knew exactly how critical this moment was, not just for her, but for every person of color who'd ever been pulled over for looking suspicious. You did this in front of witnesses, on camera, and in full view of your conscience, she thought. This time, you don't get to deny it. In the chaos of the crowd, through the buzzing of phones, through the stunned and furious eyes of Terrell's citizens, the heartbeat of the town shifted. From calm to fury, from doubt to awareness. All it took was one slap aimed at the wrong woman, one golden badge, and one unbowed stance to ignite a groundswell of justice no one saw coming. Derek was breathing heavily, the veins on his temple bulging as if they were about to burst. He no longer had control over his body. Shame welled up inside him, but his bruised ego drove him deeper into an aggressive defense, an instinct too many officers had learned to weaponize when cornered by their wrongdoing. He brought his right hand close to his waist, pretending to adjust his radio, but everyone could see his thumb hovering near the grip of his Glock 22. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A white woman in her early 30s, holding a toddler no older than 18 months, stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but it was firm. "Are you planning to kill her in front of my child?" Clarissa turned to look at the woman. Their eyes met for a single heartbeat. No words were needed. They both understood. This was no longer a personal encounter. It was a national fault line between justice and violence. A boy around 12, wearing a red hoodie and a Nike sports backpack, Micah Stone, a 7th grader at Terrell South Middle School, stepped boldly between Clarissa and Derek. "If you do anything else, this is going live on CNN." He raised his phone high. His hands didn't shake. Derek barked, his voice cracking like shattered glass under pressure. "Get out of the way!" But no one moved. The crowd had begun to take form, not as onlookers, but as a living wall of conscience. An elderly black man named Ernest Dupre, a 75-year-old war veteran, stepped forward with a cane. "This boy thinks he's still living in 1954 or what?" Clarissa still didn't move. Her arms hung loosely by her side, the badge still glinting on her left chest. She wasn't afraid, but she knew. Standing alone, anything could happen. "You will be held accountable before the law." She spoke every word with deliberate weight. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried more authority than any command that morning. It rang like the courtroom gavel, firm, precise, and undeniable. Derek was momentarily frozen. His eyes darted everywhere. The people filming, live streaming, the adults, the children, strangers standing shoulder to shoulder, forming an unspoken circle around them. Every phone was a beam of light, and this time, he had no weapon to shoot them down. Then, as if summoned by the collective conscience, 2 other patrol cars tore through from the far end of the street, sirens howling and breaking the early silence of Greenway Avenue. The car doors swung open. Officer Saunders, a tall white woman, and Officer Martinez, a clean-cut Latino man, quickly stepped out. They exchanged a glance, hands poised near their belts, not on their guns, but the standard defensive posture. Martinez frowned. "What's going on here?" But his eyes had already locked onto Clarissa's face, swollen, red, and marked, with the golden badge catching sunlight. "Oh, God," he muttered. Saunders saw the badge first. Her face went pale, her hand withdrawing from her waist. For a moment, both officers stood frozen, as if they'd walked into a storm without a shield. "It's her," she whispered. Clarissa nodded. "I am Clarissa Monroe, Associate Justice of the Texas Supreme Court, and this officer just assaulted me in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras, and in front of the silence of the very system you represent." The truth landed in the street like a boulder, shattering every illusion of power dynamics. Saunders and Martinez stood still, shackled by the very badges they wore. Their training had prepared them for many situations, but not for a judge being publicly struck by one of their own. After what felt like an endless pause, Martinez spoke, his voice hoarse. We need to report this immediately. Await further instruction." Clarissa nodded. "I'm not going anywhere, but I'm not standing here because I'm a judge. I'm here for the ones who don't hold any badge but still get hit, insulted, and humiliated every single day." Behind her, the crowd erupted in applause. No chants, no flags. But the unity, the quiet, unyielding solidarity, was the first wall built to stop the flood of injustice America had long accepted as normal. And just minutes later, a black SUV with government plates pulled into the lot. Lieutenant Vernon Reeves had arrived, and the real storm was just beginning. A sharp screech of tires tore through the morning air. A black Ford Expedition SUV with government plates, 117-GV-TX, braked hard at the edge of the Shell gas station lot, sending a flock of pigeons flapping wildly from the overhead awning. The car door swung open nearly the same moment the engine stopped rumbling. From inside, a tall man stepped out, his frame solid, spine straight like steel, face unreadable. Lieutenant Vernon Reeves, 52 years old, former senior tactical commander of the Houston PD, was the kind of man dispatched to handle high-profile, politically sensitive public incidents, especially when police misconduct intersected with racial controversy. His arrival wasn't just symbolic. It was a silent message from above. This case would not be buried. Reeves removed his sunglasses and tossed them casually into his coat pocket, as though discarding any pretense of defense. His eyes immediately locked onto the familiar face of Justice Clarissa Monroe, the same woman whose hand he had shaken during her special appointment ceremony in Austin 2 years ago. But this time, she wore no robe, stood on no raised dais. She stood in the middle of a street, with a burning red mark etched across her left cheek. He strode through the barrier of officers, past the murmuring crowd, the wailing sirens, the tension-drenched silence. He didn't need to ask to know the situation had already spiraled. Reeves stopped just one breath away from Clarissa. "Justice Monroe," he said, enunciating every syllable, voice low and steely. "Are you all right?" Clarissa didn't answer immediately. She didn't smile. She didn't nod politely. She simply tilted her head slightly to the left, letting the morning sun fall fully onto the blazing handprint across her cheek. Dried blood had darkened to a sharp edge along the corner of her mouth. That was all the answer Reeves needed. Her silence made the air feel like stone. Reeves clenched his jaw. He spun around toward Derek, now frozen stiff beside Patrol Car 74. Sweat pooled at his collar, but he tried to maintain a hardened stance. "What the hell happened here?" Reeves asked, not yelling, but each word landed like a hammer blow. Derek parted his lips, trying to speak, but before a word escaped, Clarissa's voice rang out, clear, unwavering, carrying the certainty of someone who had ruled over thousands of verdicts. "This officer stopped my vehicle without stating a reason, demanded that I step out without any explanation. And after I complied completely, he slapped me. In front of nearly 30 witnesses, in front of cameras, in front of a child clutching a teddy bear just behind me." Reeves didn't blink. He turned to Derek. "You hit her?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous depth. Derek stammered. I didn't know who she was. I thought—" "Whatever you thought doesn't erase the fact that you assaulted someone," Clarissa interrupted. "I didn't survive 3 selection cycles, 5 terms, and hundreds of rulings just to be disrespected by a cop because I'm not driving a Mercedes." Just then, a ping sounded from a journalist's phone. NBC News had just pushed a breaking alert. Breaking. Allegations of police assault on Supreme Court Justice in Terrell. Video footage confirmed. Reeves looked around. Phones were raised high. A security camera was perched on the station's awning. From farther down the lot, a manager burst out yelling, "I've got the entire thing on surveillance!" 2 angles. Full HD exclamation mark. Derek's shoulders collapsed like someone had yanked away his last mental support beam. Clarissa didn't even glance at him. Her eyes remained locked on Reeves. "You are the commanding officer on scene. I'm requesting protocol. Incident report. Evidence collection. Temporary confiscation of the officer's weapon. And direct escalation to the State Department of Justice." Reeves nodded without hesitation. He took one step toward Derek, removed his gloves, pulled out his radio, and spoke firmly. "Reeves. Secure the scene. Disarm the officer. Call EMS. Notify the Attorney General's office." Derek whispered. You can't do this. You did something you knew you weren't allowed to do," Reeves replied, his voice as still as a pond, but edged like sharpened steel. "You didn't just strike a woman. You struck the very system you swore to protect." Clarissa turned to face the crowd. A young boy was crying, his mother gently rocking him. An elderly man gave a small nod, eyes brimming. These people, quiet yet powerful, were witnessing a moment Terrell hadn't seen in a long time. Justice, late though it may be, stepping forward, with steady feet and an unflinching gaze. And Lieutenant Reeves, the man known for quelling riots, had come today not to contain, but to ignite a necessary reckoning. Less than an hour after Clarissa Monroe was escorted from the Shell gas station by a vehicle from the State Justice Office, the first videos flooded social media like a tidal wave. A 58-second clip, filmed on an iPhone by high school student Micah Stone, captured the exact moment Officer Derrick slapped Clarissa across the face, along with the crowd's shocked cries and her resolute declaration, "You just assaulted a Texas Supreme Court justice." Within just 15 minutes, the video had been shared over 120,000 times on TikTok, under titles like "Unbelievable, Cop Hits Judge in Broad Daylight," or "Black Judge Assaulted Just Because She Didn't Look Powerful." By 9:45 a.m., the hashtag number Justice for Judge Monroe had surged to the #1 trending topic on Twitter in Texas and soon spread nationwide. By noon, the clip had surpassed 1.2 million shares, straining even the bandwidth limits of some platforms. Local news station KLTV-Terrell issued an emergency broadcast, a red ticker flashing across the screen. Breaking: Terrell police accused of assaulting Supreme Court judge. Multiple video angles confirmed. The footage showed Clarissa with a swollen left cheek, a darkening bruise under her eye, standing in front of her old Camry with the gold judicial badge gleaming from her chest. Legal experts, social activists, and law professors appeared on TV, expressing outrage not just over the violence, but over the deeper issue: how bias had clouded the judgment of a sworn officer of the law. On international channels like BBC World, France 24, and Al Jazeera, the incident was featured in civil rights and U.S. justice system segments. Experts from Germany and Canada even described the event as a textbook case of racial profiling failure, noting that racial bias had directly triggered a serious law enforcement violation. At the Terrell Police Headquarters, the atmosphere turned to panic. Lieutenant Vernon Reeves immediately called an emergency meeting with all department leadership that lasted nearly 4 hours. By the end, he ordered Derrick's immediate suspension, without pay, without protection privileges, pending full investigation. Soon after, an internal email from the Texas Attorney General's office circulated: "Independent investigation into misconduct by Terrell law enforcement required. The FBI will take over. A parallel state-level judicial oversight committee must be formed." Meanwhile, inside a small, windowless interview room on the 3rd floor of the Terrell station, Clarissa sat upright on a cold, gray plastic chair. Her lips were slightly cracked, her left eye swollen like a ripe plum, yet her gaze remained razor-sharp. A sealed bottle of water sat by her right hand. On the left, a stack of documents she had brought from home, still perfectly ordered, not a single page out of place. 3 FBI agents from Dallas had arrived. One of them, a female agent of Ethiopian descent named Rebecca Lale, who had played a key role in exposing the 2018 police corruption case in Tulsa, looked at Clarissa as if she were witnessing history. "I'm sorry for what you've been through," Rebecca said, her voice low and sincere. Clarissa only nodded. "I don't need an apology. I need action." After the testimony, Clarissa's old Samsung Galaxy Note buzzed nonstop for hours. Her inbox was filled with over 490 unread emails, most from strangers. Some were from students, others from professors, attorneys, veterans, single mothers, from both within and outside the country. One message stood out among them all: "You're the reason I've decided to apply to Howard Law School. Thank you for standing up. Nyla, 12th grade." Clarissa read the message 3 times. Her eyes didn't well up. No tears fell. But inside her, a vast sea of emotion stirred. Not because she was being celebrated, but because she realized the battle she never asked for had now echoed into a generation rising with a fierce, unyielding hunger for justice. And this was only the beginning. 17 days after the incident at the Shell gas station, the name Derek Whitmore was officially listed on the criminal pretrial docket at the Henderson County Courthouse, located 36 miles from Terrell. The venue was selected to ensure impartiality and to avoid the influence of the overwhelming public response still sweeping through the original city. By 4 a.m. that morning, over 200 journalists, activists, law students, and residents had gathered outside the courthouse. They pitched makeshift tents and held banners reading, "Justice is not selective," and "Protect Black women, not attack them." Many wore canvas hats embroidered with the hashtag number sign, Judge Monroe, designed by a student and shared online with over 80,000 downloads. Clarissa Monroe arrived at 8:10 a.m., punctual as ever when stepping into a courtroom. But this time, she stood not on the bench, but as a witness, flanked by 2 attorneys from the Texas State Judicial Committee. Her familiar robe was replaced by a streamlined black blazer, and she carried a thick folder, not as evidence, but as a reminder to herself. She had once been part of this system, and today, that system would be forced to look at itself. The hearing began at 9:03 a.m. Presiding over the trial was Judge Ruth Dillard, a white woman from Dallas, known for her strict impartiality. Before her stood the defendant, Derek, wearing a wrinkled silver-gray suit, his collar open, looking small, pale, and far removed from the arrogant figure seen at the gas station. His eyes never once met Clarissa's. The defense attorney, Marla Whitby, from a legal office in Austin, opened with the argument that Derek had merely overreacted in a situation where he felt threatened. But the prosecution quickly dismantled that claim with overwhelming evidence. 4 separate videos from 4 distinct angles. Testimonies from 17 witnesses, including 5 minors. Audio analysis proves there were no shouts or threats from Clarissa before being struck. When Clarissa stepped onto the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent. Under the stark white lights, she placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, as she had once asked thousands of others to do over nearly 2 decades. "Ms. Monroe, please tell the court what happened that morning," the prosecutor said gently. Clarissa didn't look at the jury. She looked straight into justice, not on the judge's bench, but deep within the heart of the system. "I wasn't hit because I said something wrong. I wasn't hit for breaking a traffic law. I was hit because I was defined by the color of my skin and the car I drove, not by the justice I represent," she said, her voice unwavering, each word as sharp as a scalpel. "The badge in my coat pocket was not a shield, but a testament that I survived layers of discrimination. But millions don't have that badge, and if I don't stand up today, then my silence would be another slap against them." At the back row, an elderly woman wept into her hands. In the public gallery, Micah, the student who filmed the first video, sat frozen, gripping his backpack straps tightly. A Harvard law professor later quoted that testimony in an article, calling it an unofficial declaration of Black women within the U.S. justice system. The defense tried to retaliate, arguing that Derek didn't recognize Ms. Monroe as a judge, but that reasoning was swiftly dismantled. "So if she weren't a judge, the slap would be acceptable?" the prosecutor asked, and the entire courtroom paused in stunned silence. At the end of the session, after 5 hours of proceedings and more than 40 minutes of deliberation, Judge Dillard stood, her eyes steady as she read the verdict. The defendant, Derek Whitmore, is found guilty on 3 counts: second-degree assault, abuse of authority, and violation of civil rights under color of law. This court is adjourned. Remand into custody is effective immediately. The gavel struck the wooden bench like a judgment echoing through an era. And in that moment, Clarissa needed no applause. She only needed to know justice, this time, had not looked away. The large doors of the Henderson County Courthouse swung open, and the afternoon light poured through like a veil, revealing everything. Clarissa Monroe stepped out into the sea of waiting cameras. Over 300 reporters from every major outlet, CNN, MSNBC, The New York Times, Reuters, The Root, and even some independent platforms like Black News Network, rushed toward her like waves crashing on shore. There was no theme music, no polished podium with a glowing logo. Just a black woman, her cheek still bruised, standing in the heart of the street with millions of eyes watching through screens. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang out, clear and firm like an oath in a courtroom. "My name is Clarissa Monroe, and I was not struck because I did something wrong, not because I posed a threat, but because I had the wrong skin color in the eyes of the wrong man." The entire plaza in front of the courthouse fell silent. No sirens, no clamor. Only the soft rustle of wind flipping through hand-painted signs that read, "Respect Black women. We are not threats." And justice for all means. Justice for her. Clarissa didn't call for revenge. She didn't shout angry slogans. She didn't speak of prison time, compensation, or what she deserved. She said only one thing. Justice is not a reward. It is not a privilege for the famous, the educated, or those who wear robes. It is a fundamental right. The right to live without being judged, without being humiliated, without being erased from human dignity. At the edge of the sidewalk, Tomas Rivera, the mechanic who had shouted, "He just slapped a judge on that fateful morning," pushed through the crowd. He wore the same old coveralls, holding a small USB wrapped in foil. "Ms. Monroe," he said, voice hoarse with emotion, I kept a copy of the video, in case someone tries to make it disappear." Clarissa looked at him, her eyes glistening, not out of fragile emotion, but because she saw something she had believed in her entire life. That righteousness doesn't need power to survive. It only needs someone brave enough to hold on to it. She took the USB, gripped it tightly in her hand. She didn't say a casual, "Thank you." She bowed her head deeply. A silent vow. A young reporter from Philadelphia shouted, "Judge Monroe, do you believe justice has been served?" Clarissa didn't look at the questionnaire. She lifted her eyes across the plaza, where an 80-year-old woman had stood with a cane for nearly 3 hours, where children wore shirts printed with her face, where even those who weren't black held signs reading, "I stand with her." Justice has just taken its first steps. But if we stop here, that slap will be nothing more than the start of another brutal chain. True justice does not live in a verdict. It lives in memory, in action, in daily choices, and in how we protect the next person who stands where I stood today. The final sentence echoed like a drumbeat across the square. No one chanted, but dozens instinctively placed their hands over their hearts. Some cried, some stood still, but all understood. A declaration had just been written, not in ink, but in blood, tears, and resolve. When Clarissa finally turned to leave, the wind picked up, lifting scraps of paper along the sidewalk, a newspaper with that morning's headline, "From Victim to Symbol, Judge Monroe and the Rise of Justice Belief." But she didn't get into the car immediately. She stopped beside her old 2009 Camry, already cleared by the security team. She placed her hand on the hood, as if to reconnect with reality. Then, she opened the door and stepped inside. No blaring sirens, no motorcade escort. Just one woman, who had made an entire nation pause, driving herself forward once again. 3 weeks after the historic trial, Clarissa Monroe returned to the Regional Court of Appeals, where she had presided over hundreds of cases, from petty theft to multi-million-dollar land disputes. But this time, as she stepped into the courthouse, everything felt different. The security officer at the gate greeted her with a new look in his eyes. The law library staff stood up as she walked by. People who once wouldn't recognize her without her black robe now call her name with full respect. And in her small office on the 3rd floor, her old computer received over 200 emails every morning, with subject lines like, "Thank you for doing your part. I found my faith again. I want to pursue law because of you." The writers came from everywhere, from Boston to Baton Rouge, from Nova Scotia, Canada, to Monrovia, Liberia. They were first-year law students, veterans who had served in Fallujah, single mothers struggling through the healthcare system, or people who had never believed in justice, until they saw her stand tall after a slap witnessed by an entire nation. A 62-year-old man, a former interstate truck driver, wrote, "I was once arrested just for parking wrong in front of a grocery store. The court fined me $300, never asked for an explanation. I lost faith in the law after that. But you made me believe again." Thank you. NBC News reached out to invite her on Meet the Press. CNN proposed an exclusive primetime interview. PBS wanted to produce a documentary, but Clarissa declined them all. "I'm not a symbol. I'm not a celebrity. I'm just a citizen doing my part." She returned to her old desk, the same dark wooden table by the window overlooking the parking lot. But now, the desk held more than files and case law. It carried laminated handwritten letters, crayon drawings from children. One was taped beside her computer screen, a gray-haired woman in a blazer holding up a golden badge with scrawled text behind her. "She's a hero because she stood still." One Friday evening, as autumn began to creep in, there was a soft knock on her door. Clarissa opened it to find a girl about 11, standing next to her mother. The girl wore a red sweater, her hair in 2 braids, holding a piece of paper drawn in colored markers. "I made this for you," the girl said, eyes bright. "I drew you as a superhero, but without a cape." Clarissa paused, not out of surprise, but because the girl's words mirrored something she had held quietly in her heart. That sometimes, the strongest people don't need to fly. They just need to stand still. That night was the first in weeks she slept deeply, without dreams, without jolting awake. In her sleep, there were no courtrooms, no face of Derek, no clicking phones. There was only light shining on the faces of children who would grow up knowing that justice is something to be built, not something naturally given. The next morning, she woke early as always, made coffee, opened her computer, and read a letter from a student at Morehouse College, which ended with the line, "I don't need to learn the law first. I need to learn how to stand up. And I learned that from you." Clarissa sat still for a while, then opened a new message and typed the first line. "To the young people looking toward justice." And she began to write. Not a ruling, not a judgment, but a letter to the next generation. Those who will continue walking where she once stood strong. At last, something had begun to change. Join us in sharing stories that matter by liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications to start your day with powerful lessons and genuine compassion.